Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. My name is Anthony, and this is the beginning of a new year for this show. Going forward, there will be 2 episodes released every week. This one will focus on new releases and notable stories impacting schools and libraries. And on Friday each week, there will be a new interview with an author, publishing professional, or other content creators. Later this episode, we have a look at some notable releases, including leaked messages from a New Hampshire state representative showing support for segregated schools, an overview of upcoming censorship cases expected to see trial this year, and a bizarre story of a library budget struggling for approval. Let's begin with a look at some new releases, starting with The March for Hope by Valerie Bowling and illustrated by Monica McKay. A youth's first foray into activism proves transformational in Bowling's bright-eyed narrative. Compelled by Mama to attend a women's march, young Hope initially expresses uncertainty. While attendees eagerly chant and hold signs aloft, the brown-skinned protagonist is painted by an incidence of bias that occurred at school. Do girls really have power? The subject mulls. Realizing she's part of a long tradition of protest, Hope is inspired to confide the experience to Mama, as well as to come up with a plan for a school girls' march. Newly energized, Hope pivots to engagement, proudly creating and carrying a poster that reads, "My voice, my power," a phrase she commits to follow until all girls and women are treated fairly. McKay's warm, sunrise-toned artwork amplifies the text's optimism. Backdrops forego detail, focusing attention on the protagonist and fellow marchers. Depicted with various abilities and skin tones. Contextualizing back matter includes an author's note, and this book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Next is Destiny of the Diamond Princess by Sherry Winston. Adopted tween Zahara Grace, raised by a doting lawyer mother and an architect/TikTok dancing sensation grandfather called G-Pop, yearns to know more about her biological parents. For her 12th birthday, G-Pop gives Zahara Grace a DNA test kit, which traces the child's ancestry to the fictional African country of Malawanda. Soon after, King Babatunde of Malawanda barges into Zahara Grace's life, claiming to be her biological grandfather. Mythology-obsessed Zahara Grace knows all about the Malawandan royal family, which is purportedly cursed. What she doesn't know about is the looming threat of a sinister cult with a disturbing interest in Malawandan princesses. As Zahara Grace realizes that being a royal isn't all fun and games, she simultaneously contends with feelings of joy in learning about King Babatunde and the guilt that she may be jeopardizing her connection with her mother and G-Pop. Zahara Grace is a clever, compassionate protagonist who navigates difficult revelations with confidence and verve. Layered takes on adoption and familiar relations, gracefully and sensitively rendered by Sherry Winston, imbue this book with heart. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 11. Next is Fustuk by Robert Megurdic Apelian. 17-year-old Kata remembers little about his late father, an acclaimed chef in the Pars Empire, an imagined alternate Persian empire. Nevertheless, the teen has been having vivid dreams of him. These visions soon lead him to a wonderful spirit, or div, named Oz, who knew Kata's father. After Kata pleads for Oz to cure his gravely ill mother, the div agrees. In exchange, Kata, along with his older brother Garo and sister Nuri, both chefs, must present a dish to Oz that is comparable to what their father once made. As his siblings clash over what to prepare, Garo insists on sticking to their traditional high cuisine, while Nuri prefers Par's recipes. Kata struggles with feeling disconnected from his family and their shared love of cooking. Sequences alternating between portraying Kata's waking hours and his dreamscapes, which impart ethereal ambience. Fantastical world-building is imbued with Armenian and Persian mythological influences. Animated artwork rendered via shifting monochrome palettes, focus on minute character expressions and fluid movement to heighten drama and drive the grounded tale of grief and memory. An author's note and glossary conclude, and this book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Next is I Don't Wish You Well by Jumata Emil. In January 2020, Deuce Beals, a closeted black teen, purportedly killed 4 beloved Moss Point, Louisiana football players in an alleged murder-suicide. 5 years later, 18-year-old Price Cummings, a Moss Point native and closeted black freshman journalism major at Whitmore University, stumbles upon a social media post proclaiming Deuce's innocence. Price determines to investigate, hoping to turn the lead into a true crime podcast that might secure him a summer internship and subsequently delay his return to his oppressive, sports-obsessed hometown. Price also longs to disrupt the killings narrative. Moss Point community members leverage the event as a cautionary tale about queer youth, which solidifies Price's decision to keep his sexuality secret from his religious parents and football star younger brother. As Price delves deeper into the inquiry, however, his findings suggest that the true killer is still at large. Interview transcripts, news clippings, and online forum posts intersect Price's candid third-person narration, while evocative prose renders a layered, suspenseful telling that mirrors popular investigative media structures. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Next, let's take a look at some headlines. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, follow, or share wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Instagram and Blue Sky at BookFairPod or on Patreon at patreon.com/thebookfair. Following on Patreon is free, and you can find episodes posted early along with links to news sources used throughout the show. Lastly, the best way to help the Book Faire podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Next, let's take a look at some news. First up, do we really have someone advocating for segregation in 2026? This started with a leaked chat called Ed Policy 2026, when Kristen Noble, chair of the House Education Policy and Administration Committee, along with Vice Chair Katie Paternal, were discussing the upsides of segregating public schools based on political affiliations. The term segregation is not exclusive to the race-based segregation of the 20th century, though the term is heavily loaded because of that history. Kristen Noble, an elected representative for the Hillsborough 2nd District in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, said in the chat, quote, "When we have segregated schools, we can add all the fun stuff, LOL," end quote. Again, this was in a private chat for discussing education policy, where the members were joking about separating schools for Republican and Democratic staff and parents. She went on to say, quote, "Imagine the scores, though, if we had schools for them and some for us," end quote. The animosity between parties has been rising in recent years, and when there is mud slinging from conservatives, there seems to be a pattern. We can see this in Representative Noble's public response to the leaked messages. Just a matter of hours after the chat was leaked with Kristen Noble joking about segregating schools, she stated publicly, quote, "It's funny to watch Democrats feign outrage when I thought they'd be supportive of managing their own schools with libraries full of porn, biological males in girls' sports and bathrooms, and as much DEI curriculum as their hearts desire. Schools like that will have terrible test scores because they focus on social justice rather than academics," end quote. Here is an elected representative spreading bigoted lies about what progressive people advocate for. Fighting for the freedom to read has nothing to do with porn. Inclusion of trans people is not simply having males in girls' bathrooms. It's having girls included in girls' spaces made for girls and understanding that trans girls are girls. and the third pillar of the conservative boogeyman, DEI, somehow being a detriment and assuming that encouraging diversity would mean less time for teaching. This is a great reminder that 2026 is a midterm election year, and if you are concerned about the future of education, make sure that people like Representative Noble are unable to hold seats in your district. If you're eligible to vote, make sure you're an informed voter, and if not, look for ways to help raise awareness in your community. Midterm elections have dramatically lower turnout than presidential election years, and this usually favors conservative candidates. Get active in your community if you are able, and be an informed voter if you are eligible. Next, a story from New York where a library budget vote faced a recount after a suspicious result. In November, voters in Stephentown, New York, were able to vote on a ballot initiative to increase the county's public library funding from $95,000 to $110,000 annually. This would be the first increase in funding for the library since 2018 and only raise property taxes by $10. Surprisingly, the ballot measure failed with an astounding 524 no votes to only 57 yes. For a state like New York, even in a smaller town, this is an unusual result to see a landslide decision for a county-level provision. A recount was called, and the library found that the result was incorrect. A hand recount found the proposition passed, with 540 votes for yes and 279 votes for no. This story is concerning for local elections, and there is currently no explanation for what led to the incorrect vote count. Rensselaer County responded by recounting ballots from Election Day. The investigation found that this error only affected county and city provisions and assured that the process of recounting will be open and transparent. Coming up next, every school should have a librarian, but how many New York City public schools currently have one? A city council ordinance now requires the NYC Education Department to report data on school librarians and library access. In December, the first report was released that examined 1,614 public schools and found 63%, or 1,016 schools, have a library. This is already not a promising result, and it only gets worse. New York City public schools in totality employed 273 full-time librarians and 12 part-time librarians. If we are generous and assume that the 12 part-time librarians are staffing a library all their own, this comes to 28% of school libraries actually having dedicated librarians employed. Chalkbeat.org, where this story originates, looked at the school budget items and found that many schools required a librarian in their budget that did not have one staffed. City ordinance also requires all secondary schools with more than 700 students to have a full-time certified librarian. This highlights the struggles public schools have been facing with funding and staffing. While teachers are already underpaid, having schools omit required jobs that still have budgetary problems means that there is either a shortage of qualified applicants or there simply is not enough funding to pay the salary for librarians in over 3/4 of schools. Another part of New York City's library laws requires students in 7th and 8th grade to receive at least one period of library and information instruction per week. If you live in New York City, you can check for yourself at chalkbeat.org's article, where they break down the publicly available information of which public schools have a library or the required staff. To find the article more easily, check out patreon.com/thebookfair. That is where links to news sources used in today's episode can always be found. Closing out this week's episode, let's take a look at some ongoing court cases that may be worth following in 2026. This is coming from an article from Book Riot. If you follow the Book Faire podcast, a lot of stories begin with articles from Book Riot, which is great at including links to the original sources. Number 1, Penguin Random House v. Florida. Filed by Penguin Random House along with many other publishers and the Authors Guild and several notable authors, this lawsuit challenges House Bill 1069, and the way the state removes books due to the law. In August, Judge Carlos Mendoza ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, stating that the state's policy is overbroad and unconstitutional. As legal cases tend to go, the state of Florida appealed the ruling. Defendants cite the decision of Little v. Llano County, which is a similar case out of Texas. Florida also leaned into disinformation in their appeal, pulling an example of content they consider obscene that were not part of the court's ruling, meaning it is not relevant to the case, as well as misquoting their own law, claiming that HB 1069 prohibits sexually depictive content, a phrase that does not appear in the bill. This story is worth following because 20 other state attorneys general have a brief based on this case. If this appeal goes through, this could set precedent in 20 other states to lead to more book bans based on personal beliefs and state interpretation without allowing review of content by the community. Number 2, American Library Association versus Sonderling. While Rhode Island v. Trump secured funding for the Institute for Museum and Library Services, this is a second lawsuit regarding the Trump administration's actions to close the IMLS. The lawsuit by the ALA notes that the IMLS does not have a budget for 2026. The current budget ends in January, and if this case doesn't go forward, the agency will effectively be closed, even with the previous suit restricting presidential actions to shutter the IMLS. Number 3, Penguin Random House et al. V. Labrador. This comes from Idaho, where Penguin Random House, along with other publishers and authors, filed against the state's book censorship law HB 710. The vagueness of the law would require the Donnelly Public Library to become adults only, cutting off all access for minors to the library entirely. This is because the law requires material with sexual content be moved to adults-only areas, and the Donnelly Public Library is too small to create a separate space that is not accessible to children. Other states have similar laws, so this ongoing case could save states like Wyoming that are trying to push similar legislation. I could go on, and this article includes more headlines from other sites dealing with book bans, so I'll end with number 4. Penguin Random House et al. V. Reynolds. Iowa passed a version of what is often referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill in May of 2023. Senate File 496 has 3 main points that are currently blocked due to the ongoing lawsuit. A K-12 book ban for all books containing descriptions or depictions of sex, which would include health and sex ed texts used in classroom instruction. A provision that forbids programs, curriculum, instruction, and more relating to gender identity or sexual orientation, and a forced outing provision that requires teachers and staff to report to parents if a student asks to use a different name or pronoun, regardless of whether that would put the student in danger. The final point is unfortunately an important one. Gender identity and sexual orientation are deeply personal and inherent to an individual. If a child is in a home where they hear violent rhetoric towards LGBTQ+ people and communities, a trans or queer child would not feel safe sharing their thoughts or identity with the family. Coming out to a trusted adult and being accepted, even if it's outside of the home, can lead to better outcomes for LGBTQ+ children. The largest threat against people with diverse identities comes from familial or social stigmatization or bullying, and self-harm stemming from familial or societal stigmatization. If a guardian has bigoted or violent views toward LGBTQ+ identities, there can be and have been examples of minors facing physical abuse or homelessness due to being outed. Acceptance and tolerance is the goal, and fighting against bills like SF 496 in Iowa will help save children's lives. If you or someone you know is facing struggles relating to LGBTQ+ issues, you can reach out to 988 for emergency support. There are also resources available from the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline, or the LGBT National Hotline. This will conclude an episode of the Book Faire podcast. If you would like to learn more about any of the stories covered this week, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair. That is where links to news sources can be found, along with episodes posted early. Come back on Friday, where we will have an interview with author and illustrator Denise Caesar. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.